Hi everybody in ecec 110. It's Patricia. I know there's just been a few of us gathering on the Monday nights. We've gone to alternate Monday nights just because the courses is going for every 2 weeks. But I do appreciate all the discussion that's been on the discussion board and your peer support for discussions on that point. I do want to raise the fact that for the next 2 weeks, so on the 22nd and the 29th, there will be no gathering times. There'll be no gathering times. We'll have a final gathering time on the 9th for our last class, just to pull any threads together for those of you who want to join us just on the last evening. I've been sharing with those that have been at the gathering times, and some of you have been on the journey with me this semester. I'm calling to you today from Toronto. I have had permission to come to Toronto to assist my mother, who's been in broke her arm, at 96 broke her arm, and has been in rehab care for the last 2.5 months. The anticipation that she was going to come home to her own residence on Friday. Sadly, that was not the case. When I arrived there, she didn't know who I was and was traumatized and visibly distressed, and so we are not bringing her home to her space, and she will be moving into assisted care living. So for my next week, I'm going to be juggling and getting assisted care set up for her and getting her settled into there. So I am in Toronto. I am 3 hours ahead of time for you, time-wise, but I'm still here for you. This week we're starting on cognitive development, and we chose to put cognitive development as the last piece of development because so often it becomes the first piece of development we want to talk about in child development. And so we purposely put it to the last piece of it because it gives us a chance to spend some time on social, emotional, and physical development, and because we don't always spend as much time as we should on those topics. So now we get into the cognitive part, the thinking part of development. So for the next 2 weeks, it's cognitive development, and it rolls in everything when we start thinking about it. It's absolutely huge when we start thinking about it. We're going to look at some of the theories and theorists that some of you have been looking at for your big assignment pieces. So take a look at the overview on what is cognitive development and where it fits. We took it a little bit on the brain for the baby brain, looking at just another review of the brain, because it's that part of our body we don't always think about in terms of development. So it's a really important piece to come back to and think about how that brain is controlling the development, is supporting the development, and as our development grows, so does our brain grow. So what's growing? Is it the brain or the experiences? Nature, nurture. It's continually there as we go through. The first part of it we're going to look at is a lot of work with Piaget in the sensory motor and the 3 stages of development. So he talks about the sensory motor stages and sort of looking at those stages that we work through in the very early years. And then we move on to the other theories of Piaget's theories about looking at the schemas and the assimilation and how we build those schemas and build those assimilations and accommodation. Those are the 3 big ones. Schemas aren't a lot that we talk about because we determine how children scaffold their developmental into the developmental domains, and how often for instance, think about how often you observe children experimenting with rules to gain information about how the world works on their own way. So they're trying to figure out how the world works and how they work within the world. These are some of the schemas that children think so. So when they're looking at things or doing things or throwing things, the classic is an infant or toddler throwing something off the side and throwing off at something. I think, why are they doing this over and over again? Because they're learning about it as they're going over again. This is a schema of learning. So they're learning how things that are going up and down, things that are connecting together and take apart and put it together. These are the schemas of learning. These are the maps for how we learn. So these are some of the schemas that we look at within the developmental pieces of looking. These are the things that go around, things that spin, things that go up, things that go in, things that go out. And that's why we do those things over and over again until we get them patterned in our brain and get an understanding for them. Language and literacy development falls into cognitive development because it's language. We're using our brain to promote those words. And so we look at the key milestones for fostering language development and where we're looking at in language development and language acquisition. The interesting part is that language acquisition is global. Irregardless of what language you speak, we go through these steps and stages of language development. Also, numeracy development, not something that we spend a lot of time on. We probably should be spending more time on numeracy development, but it's the act of being it. And that's why we look at early cognitive materials, particularly in math and literacy. If we look at Montessori materials, very hands-on, very movement, because children are hands-on learners. They're looking at concrete operations and moving into that piece of it. We move into the middle childhood, and we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at Vygotsky's idea of the zone of proximal development, that this is the zone that we know we're confident in, and this is the zone that we're not so confident in. And so we broach out into that one, but we come back to what we know. And each time our zones may grow as we grow and develop and change. We get bigger zones of what we know and smaller zones of what we don't know. So zones of proximal development are a really important piece. It's a big terminology that we use on a regular basis. And you can conceive how the zones of proximal development connect to Piaget's ideas of cognitive development as well. We also can look at the Piagetian, the classic Piagetian tasks. And this one in particular is looking at the development of, so if we take 2 cups of water, we pour it into a short fat glass, and we take the same 2 cups of water and we pour it into a tall skinny glass, which one has more water? Most children at a certain age will pick the taller one because there's more water standing up higher, even though they've seen you take exactly the same amount of water and put it into the 2 cups. However, many of us still have that piece when we go to the grocery store. We have to check and see, do we buy the thing that has more because it looks bigger? Or do we buy the thing that is smaller, but it still has the same amount of fluid or more fluid in it? So it's an interesting piece that comes through on our time, but children can't reverse that piece of it. Well, I saw you do that, but now when I'm looking at it, all I see is this one has more. That's why we look at the idea of somebody who's taller is older. So that piece of looking at how they reverse thinking and how they think about it. In older children, we get to have that reversibility. They can see, well, you poured the same amount of water in. I know it's there. But I want to have a tendency to say that it's the tall, skinny one that has more in it. When we go on to looking at memory and types of memory, some of you may be interested in looking at the memory and the memory stages. That one I am not going to look at this week. It's a little too close to home. But memory and memory stages is definitely something to look at in terms of intelligence and looking at where children come. Finally, at the end of these 2 weeks, we're going to look at spiritual development. Not religious development necessarily, but the development of spirituality that looks at the idea that children wonder how they came to be in the world, how the world came to be. For instance, our grandson recently asked the question, where did the first person come from? And it's like, wow, that's kind of a loaded question here. What did he want to know? How did they get to be? And then he asked about the first kid. Where was the first kid? Who was the first kid? How did the first kid come to be? And so how does that happen? And so they just asked these questions, which are big spiritual questions to ask about. We can look at it from a science perspective. We can look at it from a religious perspective. There are all sorts of ways to look at it. But it looks at that bigger meaning. They want to know how things came to be. And we're thinking, children in early childhood, are they capable of asking these big questions? Are they capable of understanding big concepts? If we cut all the trees down, what's going to happen to the world? If we dirty all the water, what's going to happen to the world? Are children capable of those ideas? Are they thinking about those ideas? So let's spend a little time with the spiritual development and philosophy development with children. There are also subsets of it. We can look at faith development and religious understanding. We're going to look here at philosophical ideas and Tiffany Poyer's ideas. A BC teacher, I think Surrey, is her home base right now. But looking at how she uses, in middle school, uses the ideas of philosophy and encourages the ideas of philosophical thinking. So for the next 2 weeks, cognition. And so settle in and enjoy. I see that the big assignments are rolling in. I had a wonderful afternoon commenting on many of the big assignments. I had proposed a due date of a certain time this week. However, as always with any of my courses, as long as it's in my hands by the end of term, which is April 16th, I can live with it. I'll panic about it, but I can live with it. So we'll carry on. Again, remember, no gathering this Monday night on March the 22nd. I'm here, but I'm out there in Toronto, but I'm here for you and for this course, and I will be online and participating in the online discussion since I'm not hosting a gathering this week. All right, thanks everybody. See you online.